Cuphead is known for its difficulty, with a lot of people going as far as calling it the Dark Souls of its genre. Now, whether people agree with that or not isn't important here, but what I believe the majority of people would agree on is that this game isn't the easiest either. Each boss has their own quirks and obstacles to get past, and some obstacles might be harder for me than you. But you know what can make these bosses easier? Using a good weapon. But what weapons are good, you may ask? Well, while all weapons have their time and place to be used, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are good all the time. So that's what I've come to rank. What are the best weapons in the game after considering everything there is? Speaking of which, I'll be ranking each weapon based on its DPS and EX damage / properties, how effective the weapon is across all boss fights, how easy it is to use, and its versatility. I feel like I should clarify what I mean by how effective a weapon is and its versatility. What I mean by effectiveness is how good is that shot for that boss fight overall. If the shot is only good for one phase, meaning it deals maximum damage or is the easiest to hit during that phase, I wouldn't consider it effective for the whole boss fight, even though it shined very well during that phase. With that logic, you could very much argue that basically every shot is effective for every boss, since realistically every weapon can be used for every boss fight during a phase or two. A good example can be using Roundabout while fighting Moonshine Mob. While Roundabout and Smoke Bomb combined make the second phase a cakewalk, it can be argued that it's not the most effective weapon for a majority of the boss fight. What can really separate a good weapon from a great weapon is how much value you can get for using that weapon across the whole boss fight. That's basically what I mean by versatility as well. If it can be used for a majority of the boss fights and still not lose its effectiveness, then I would consider that weapon pretty versatile. Overall, this is a hard metric to calculate and determine, so please consider that difficulty when listening to what I have to say about each weapon. I wanted to make this clear now just to avoid any confusion, because I see a lot of tier lists do this differently. I'm going to be ranking the shot and EX together, so I'm ranking the weapon as a whole, not separately. Thus, that means that both the EX and the shot will be ranked together on the tier list. Just want to say that now, because, it might look weird on the tier list, just so you know. With all of that, let's begin this tier list. Good old Peashooter. This is the base weapon of Cuphead, and thus you could say is the benchmark that all the other weapons will be judged upon. It's a very simple weapon to use, and can be used for many of the boss fights in this game. Its average DPS of 30 is exactly that, average, and the EX max damage is also an average at 25. While it sports average stats, the weapon itself is easy to use and can, like I mentioned earlier, be used for most of the boss fights in the game without its effectiveness vanishing. This obviously goes into B tier, seeing as that is the middle or average tier, and serves to be what we compare the other weapons to. Spread is one of the first options of weapon you can purchase from Porkrind's Emporium, which comes as a surprise considering it's really good. It has the highest DPS in the game at 41 damage per second, with the second highest DPS technically being Charge Shot with 35 damage per second, so Spread out DPS's second place by a considerable amount. This is considering that you're hitting every shot, but even if you're not hitting every shot, you're still doing at the very least 30 damage per second, which is just average. So you're really just losing your range in exchange for a higher DPS. With that, I generally can't think of any boss that Spread wouldn't lose all of its effectiveness for. Now, I'm not saying that Spread is the best weapon for every boss, but every boss has at least 2 phases where Spread would be very effective due to how high its DPS is. The EX shot is very hit or miss though, because of the nature of how it shoots. Since the EX shoots out a shot in every cardinal direction, for the majority of bosses, you're never dealing maximum damage with your EX. This is true unless you're in a phase of a boss fight where the boss at that time is in the background and you can fully enter its hitbox. These are known as background bosses or phases. Some examples would be Chauncey Chantani in the last phase of the Root Pack, Baby the Clown's second and last phase, and Werner Werman's last phase. Since they're in the background, you can enter that area of the screen and not take damage, while also being able to deal damage while inside of their hitbox. If it wasn't obvious at this point, that means you can do your Spread EX while inside of their literal hitbox, and thus deal max damage with your EX shot. Nonetheless, I will have to admit that the EX shot's effectiveness wildly varies from boss to boss. It's still a good EX, but not as versatile as many of the other weapons. I would say Spread is easy to use, but sometimes you have to position yourself in a slightly awkward position or constantly jump for some bosses for you to be dealing max damage always. Even with everything I have said, I can say with confidence this gets an A tier. I would honestly like to put it in S tier, but I would feel wrong for putting it there with all the points I mentioned, although those points aren't huge problems or cons in my opinion. This is a really good weapon and works wonders for a lot of the boss fights. Chaser, I would say, is on the opposite side of the spectrum compared to Spread. Its purpose is for your shots to home in on any enemies nearby, so you don't have to worry about aiming, at the cost of losing just about half of your average DPS of 17. A lot of the time, the shots don't even go where you want them to, depending on the boss, so while it's a versatile shot, it can't be limited since its purpose that it's trying to fill is small, and is only truly effective for a few of the boss fights. The EX damage is surprisingly high, but the way you deal damage with it is quite weird. You either need to get super close to the enemy for the shots to damage them and go away, or you have to use multiple EX shots for the shots orbiting you to home in on the closest target. While this normally is an easy weapon to use, the EX is just weird, and I'd honestly rather use any of the other weapons' EX shots than this one. Because of these reasons, I couldn't give it any rank higher than a C tier. Chaser by itself is a mediocre shot, but where it shines more is complementing your other weapon. So while you'll need to reposition yourself for something similar, you can just easily switch and start mindlessly shooting your Chaser shots until you're ready to switch back to your main weapon. This is definitely not a shot I would use except for a phase or two for a few of the boss fights. Oh, I forgot to mention also that there is a weapon that does exactly what Chaser does, but better in my opinion. So yeah. Lobber is actually quite underrated and deserves a bit more attention than I believe people give it. Now maybe this is just me, but when I first played this game, I thought Lobber was too weird and hard to use, but really this shot is a lot better than you might imagine for quite a lot of the bosses. I mean, in general, this weapon could be used for a majority of the boss fights in this game, but some bosses it excels at, like Grim Matchstick, the Devil, Werner Werman, which may come as a surprise to some, and really any boss where the boss is not moving. Lobber's DPS and EX damage are actually just above average at 33 and 28, but it does pretty massive damage per shot at 11.6, which in comparison to most of the other weapons is very high. It also has a quirk that no other weapon has, which is that when it hits the ground, it bounces for a couple of times. This gives the weapon more time to deal damage, and you can set a sort of damage trap for the boss. A good example is during the Devil's first phase when he becomes a serpent. You can shoot up in the air with Lobber before he starts traveling across the screen, and since it bounces, he will end up running into the bouncing Lobber shots and take that huge damage. This won't affect the tier placement drastically, but it is something to note. I would say this weapon can be used effectively for many of the boss fights in this game, and the EX shot is also very good and can be reliably used. I think with everything considered, this weapon can sit just about in the A tier. Great damage, great EX, can be used for a good amount of the boss fights without its effectiveness being reduced much, and pairs nicely with other weapons. Its range is its biggest drawback of course, but like any other weapon, you can bring it out during specific phases of a boss fight and it usually works pretty well. Charge Shot honestly receives the same treatment as Lobber when it comes to being underused. I've actually grown to respect and like this shot after I actually tried using it. Charge does, by a huge margin, the most damage per shot in the game at a whopping 46 when charged, but because the fire rate is considerably slower than most of the other shots in the game, it deals an average of 35 damage per second. Of course, if you don't charge the shot it sucks, which is the intention, so you have to charge the weapon to be effective. Now the timing can be a bit weird at first, since at least for me, I would either not hold it for long enough to shoot a charged shot, or I would hold onto it for too long, essentially limiting my DPS and general damage output. It definitely takes some getting used to for this weapon to be used effectively. Luckily, it can be basically used on almost every boss because of the simple nature of how the weapon shoots, and it also has a pretty huge hitbox, so that makes it easier to hit smaller or moving enemies. So I would definitely say it's versatile. The EX shot is alright, dealing 26 damage on hit. Where it falls off is its range. It's basically a short area of effect blast, so unless you can get close to the boss without risk of taking damage, the effectiveness overall of this EX is a bit unsure. In testing though, the blast radius of the EX was actually decently large and can be pretty easily spammed, but its EX damage is still a bit underwhelming and many other EX shots are better and can be used more reliably than this one. I believe with everything considered, Charge Shot deserves to be in the A tier, where it falls off in ease of use and the EX's limited range and damage, it makes up for in the Charge Shot's massive damage, range, and EX spammability. Roundabout. I mean, I hope I don't need to explain where this sits on the tier list, but of course I will, just in case I need to enlighten anyone. Roundabout is basically just a better version of Peashooter. While it has an average DPS of 31, each shot deals 8.5 damage, which is pretty decent for how the shot works. The range of the weapon is obviously amazing. Just turn around and the weapon reaches across the whole screen. Now, while some may say that its fire rate is a bit slower than usual, I see this as actually not a bad thing. Because of the shot's nature of going forward and then coming back towards you, you can usually shoot backwards for a bit while the boss begins their next phase or attack, and then start looking forward again with another shot like spread, and start dealing massive spread DPS while the rest of the shots from the Roundabout land, being able to potentially deal more damage. Also, Roundabout excels at clearing minions and other small enemies on the screen. Again, because of how the weapon works, the shots stay longer on screen and give more time for smaller enemies to arrive and be dealt with by those stray shots. The EX is great, dealing the most maximum damage of all the weapons, and also being pretty easy to use and spam. Roundabout itself is also easy to use, effective on a majority of the boss fights, and pairs very well with other weapons. I mean, this is an easy S tier if you ask me, or at the very least A tier. Anything lower than that would be insulting the usefulness of this weapon in my opinion. Crackshot is, like Roundabout, just a better version of another shot, and in this case, it's Chaser. Crackshot is a mix of a normal short-range burst damage shot that turns into a homing attack at longer ranges that deals half as much damage. For a shot that plays both roles of a normal weapon and a homing attack, its damage is pretty decent and acceptable, at 30 DPS uncracked and 18 DPS cracked. This puts its DPS in line with Peashooter uncracked and very slightly better than Chaser cracked. While you may think it sports average stats, where it shines is its unbelievable versatility. You can literally bring this shot to any boss fight and it's effective. You can deal great burst damage with your uncracked shot, and whenever you need to focus on dodging attacks, just keep shooting and the shots will home in on the nearest enemy, which is usually the boss. The EX shot is also pretty cool and useful too. The EX shoots out a planet that shoots small projectiles every second 5 times before disappearing, which makes it great for dealing passive damage towards the boss or getting rid of smaller minion-like enemies. You can also spam your EX in order to send the planet orb towards whatever is closest to deal a burst of 12 damage, or parry it for 14 damage. The parry can also act as a maneuver move, which also gives you a small percentage of your super meter back. Crackshot is easy to use, arguably the most versatile weapon in the game, and is in turn very effective. This is an easy S tier, and I'd be surprised if people thought this wasn't a good weapon. Converge is quite a weird one to rank, to be completely honest. If I had to explain what Converge is, I would say it's a mix of spread shot and Peashooter. Converge is a short to long range shot that shoots a spread of 3 shots, and you can narrow the spread by holding the weapon lock button for more accuracy for medium to long range. It has an average DPS of 33, just slightly above Peashooter, and if all shots hit, it deals 8 damage. This damage is quite unenthusiastic, but at least its burst damage is decent. It does have the extra perk of piercing enemies, which makes it actually quite effective for taking down multiple enemies at once, and good for some bosses. The EX shot is quite underwhelming as well, dealing 21 damage, which is less than Peashooter. Where it does make up though is its spam ability. It's an EX that shoots a big bolt that instantly travels across the screen, so it's a guaranteed 21 damage if you hit, which is unlike, for example, the Peashooter EX, which can deal a max of 25, but it's not guaranteed if you don't aim your EX shot the best. Its versatility is alright, with Converge being a decent pick for a good amount of the boss fights. This makes the EX pretty easy to use, but Converge itself I wouldn't say is the easiest weapon to use. You have to manage switching from what I would call shotgun mode to rifle mode to make the weapon's DPS consistent across the whole boss fight. While this might not be a problem for some or most, I feel like it wouldn't be correct to state this is an easy shot to use, considering the other easy weapons I have stated before and the constant micromanaging you need to do. Now another problem I have is that although Converge can work for a lot of the boss fights really, the question that makes this difficult to determine is it really the best or most effective weapon for that boss? The answer the majority of time is no. So with it being not naturally an easy weapon to use, its average damage, and its effectiveness being outshined by most of the other weapons as well, putting it anywhere above B tier would be an insult to the other weapons in that tier and above. I could actually see this being in C tier, but I believe its comparison to Peashooter is fitting for the weapon, so B tier it goes for now. Now the last shot is Twist Up. Now the opinion on this weapon can change drastically depending on who you ask, but before I let my emotions and opinions inevitably control the ranking of this weapon, let's analyze it first. Twist Up is a pretty unique weapon to use, with the shots curving upwards instead of going straight like every other weapon in the game. It sports an average DPS of 32 and deals just about 7 damage if every shot hits. While the normal shot is pretty average, the EX shot is quite the opposite. It is tied with Roundabout for dealing the most maximum EX damage of 40. The EX shot is a cyclone that revolves around in a circular pattern that expands over time. This makes it pretty decent for any background phases of boss fights, but unfortunately, Roundabout's EX shot I would say is just better. With that, Twist Up's versatility is quite dismal, believe it or not. Because of the nature of how the shot works, it makes it only very good for very specific phases and bosses, and even with that, there are other weapons that are just better at the job, whether it be better damage or easier to use. Speaking of ease of use, this weapon is not objectively easy to use. Again, because of the nature of the shot, you have to angle your shots by holding the weapon lock button a lot just for the shots to actually hit most of the bosses. That, or getting really close to the boss, which at that point, why not just use spread or any other shorter ranged weapon? I actually wanted to go through this weapon tier list video together by Potato King, great name by the way, since while I was researching each weapon for this video, I stumbled across Potato King's video and his opinion on Twist Up is very different from mine to say the least. So let's go through the video and see what his points are.
And finally, the shot at least like a third of you I think have been waiting for. Twist Up. Now, before we begin, let me start off this segment by saying that Twist Up slander will not be tolerated on this channel. And that's because this shot is overhated for what I can tell no reason. Oh, it doesn't shoot straight forward. Aim diagonally. Oh, it's just worse roundabout. How? It has the same damage output when all three twisters hit. It's really situational. Not really? Like, I get it. If you just can't aim, like, at all, then it's not for you. But it's actually really versatile, and it can be used for just about any fight. If you're good enough, that is. So yeah, Twist Up is really good, and you're all just bad at aiming. And just in case you're still on the fence about if this shot is effective against multiple bosses, then don't worry. Because the Root Pack, Cagney Carnation, Ruby and Croaks, Baroness Von Bonbon, Beppy the Clown, Rumor Honeybottoms, Captain Brightenbeard, Verna Vermin, Phantom Express, Chips Badigan, Pip and Dot, Hoppus Pocus, Pirouetta, Mangosteen, King Dice the Devil, Glumstone the Giant, Moonshine Mob, Howling Aces, Mortimer Freeze, Chef Dollbaker, and the Angel and Demon can all be dealt with pretty efficiently using Twist Up. I got that first try! Let's go! More than half the bosses in this game. And you still think it's unviable? So yeah.
Now that we've watched the whole video, let's go section by section to see what he says.
Oh, it doesn't shoot straight forward. Aim diagonally.
The fact that you have to aim diagonally and stand completely still, essentially for it to be effective for most of the boss fights he mentions, is a bit concerning to be honest. And not even to mention, you still have to be somewhat closer to the boss than normal for those diagonal shots to hit.
Oh, it's just worse roundabout. How? It has the same damage output when all three twisters hit.
The key phrase is if every shot hits. While it's not terribly difficult to hit all shots, combined with the awkwardness of the shot's trajectory, it is very possible that you will not hit all the shots a good amount of the time. You might think generally the same for spread, but the only reason it gets away with that more is because the nature of the weapon is easy to hit and its high DPS makes up for missing a couple of the outer shots of the weapon. I would also argue that Roundabout's EX shot is way easier and more effective than Twist Up's EX since it just shoots forward and you can easily hit the boss multiple times while the Cyclone isn't the easiest to hit. Whether you agree or not that Twist Up is just a worse Roundabout is up to you.
It's really situational. Not really? Like, I get it. If you just can't aim, like, at all, then it's not for you. But it's actually really versatile, and it can be used for just about any fight. If you're good enough, that is. So yeah, Twist Up is really good, and you're all just bad at aiming. And just in case you're still on the fence about if this shot is effective against multiple bosses, then don't worry. Because the Root Pack, Cagney Carnation, Ruby and Croaks, Baroness Von Bonbon, Beppy the Clown, Rumor Honeybottoms, Captain Brightenbeard, Verna Vermin, Phantom Express, Chips Badigan, Pip and Dot, Hoppus Pocus, Pirouetta, Mangosteen, King Dice the Devil, Glumstone the Giant, Moonshine Mob, Howling Aces, Mortimer Freeze, Chef Dollbaker, and the Angel and Demon can all be dealt with pretty efficiently using Twist Up. I got that first try! Let's go! More than half the bosses in this game. And you still think it's unviable?
The thing is, Twist Up is objectively a situational weapon. That's kind of the point of the weapon. It's meant to be used if a boss is higher on the screen and can be used diagonally for it to be used for more applications than just straight up. The fact that you also have to be good at aiming Twist Up is a testament to how it's not an easy weapon to use. Also, like how I generally mentioned at the beginning of the video, just because the weapon can be used for a boss or particular phase does not mean it's the best weapon for that phase or good for the boss fight entirely. I could very well make an argument about a good amount of the boss fights he mentions and how two other weapons are particularly better for that situation, but the one boss I wanted to go over and mention is Ruby and Croaks. This really came as a surprise considering each phase of the fight. There isn't one phase during Ruby and Croaks that Twist Up is actually good. Again, you can very well use Twist Up for the first and second phase, but think about this for a moment. Why would I ever use Twist Up for Ruby and Croaks if I have both Roundabout and Spread? There is nothing that Twist Up does during the boss fight that either Roundabout and Spread just do better, and are in fact easier to use during the boss fight. Actually, I would go as far as to say that Spread is just better than Twist Up in every way for almost every boss fight he mentions. With everything I have said here, Twist Up is going into C tier. I was going to put it in B tier, but I just couldn't see many situations that another weapon is just better in, which fits with why Chaser is here as well, so it only felt fitting to put Twist Up here. Okay, so I felt like it was necessary to go over each boss and tell you why I don't like Twist Up and I don't think Twist Up is a good weapon. And just so you know ahead of time, this is not my S rank save, so you will not see S ranks on everything. So, Root Pack, you would never use Twist Up on, definitely. You just use Spread. Gooby Legrand, same thing. You could use it, I guess, but you could just use Spread. Obviously, I'm skipping all the plain bosses because, well, you can't use any weapons. Cagney Carnation, you could use Twist Up on. You could. But, you know what you could just use, honestly, better is Spread. I mean, either way, honestly, Cagney Carnation is very neutral. Ruby and Croaks, definitely. If you use Twist Up on this boss, then you're throwing. Baroness Von Bonbon, you could get away with it, but I would honestly just use Spread. Baby the Clown is, you could make an argument definitely about Baby the Clown with his second, third, and fourth phase, but you know what does it better? Spread. It has better consistent EX. You're going to be almost always doing 34 damage, which is the max EX damage of Spread. And Spread is just better, just higher DPS. It's just better in basically, in almost every way, I would say, for the Baby the Clown fight. Grim Matchstick, definitely not using Twist Up. I'll move on. Rumor Honeybottoms, definitely not. Captain Brandybeard, you could, but guess what? Spread is better. Sally Stage Play, you could use it for the last phase, but you know what's better? Spread for every other phase. Warner Worman, actually Twist Up is decent. That's literally one of the only bosses Twist Up is actually decent in. Calamuria, oh, you can't use Calamuria, sorry. Phantom Express, you could use Twist Up, but you know what's better? Spread. Oh my god, you see a theme here? And then King Dice, Twist Up is way too inconsistent to be able to use for King Dice, to be completely honest. Just use, you know, whatever other weapon. Devil, again, you could use Twist Up, but you know what's better? Oh my gosh, guess what? Spread. Oh my gosh. We can't believe it, right? This is why I wanted to put Spread in S tier, and honestly, I might, but, because Spread is honestly such an amazing weapon. It works for almost all the boss fights. But anyways, DLC bosses. Glumstone the Giant, it could be used. Twist Up is not bad. Twist Up's not bad. It's viable, for sure. Moonshine Mob, no. Just don't. Mortimer Freeze, again, no. Just no. And then Chef Saltbaker, kind of. But that's it. Again, all these, I just went through every single boss, and there really were not many bosses at all where Twist Up is actually, like, a good weapon to use. And it always gets outshined by Spread. It's like, literally, like, it's like Luigi. Twist Up is Luigi, and Spread is Mario. It's like, just use Mario. It's just the better version. It's just the better one. So that's why I don't think Twist Up is good. And although I might have been a little bit harsh with its placement, because its EX is actually pretty decent for a good amount of the boss fights, the fact that it's not even a good weapon by itself without the EX is where the problem comes in. So I feel like I just had to elaborate on this, because although, you know, I got to finalize the video at some point, I just wanted to make this point right now. So hopefully that all makes sense, and let's get back to the video. With all the normal shots done, let's try to quickly rank the plain weapons. So the weapons to rank are the plain Peashooter, Mini Bomb, Miss Chalice's 3-way, Miss Chalice's Mini Bombs, and both the plain supers. The normal plain Peashooter is, well, just Peashooter, but in plain form. The projectiles take a decent amount of time to travel across the screen, so make sure to lead your shots if the boss is moving slightly in order to maximize your DPS. The EX is pretty decent and easy to hit, so with little options and good attributes, I guess A tier it goes. The mini-bombs are basically the equivalent of Lobber. The mini-bombs deal significant burst damage, so it can be great for clearing minion-like enemies which usually have pretty low health. It actually deals damage twice, once on impact and again with the explosion, so keep that in mind. The EX is also good for clearing nearby minions since it homes in on the nearest enemy. It can do pretty decent burst damage as well though if you can get up close to the boss. I would say it goes with plain Peashooter in the A tier as well. The super is simply a huge bomb that deals massive damage, is easy to use and maneuver, and you become invincible for a short time after you use it, so you're not in danger of getting hit immediately after using it. The only drawback is that if you hit anything, you explode, so you need to make sure that you have an opening to hit the boss directly to deal max damage and not a minion or stray projectile by accident. The damage I feel makes up for it though, so another A tier we go. Now, Ms. Chalice's 3-way is surprisingly different from Cuphead and Mugman's. Instead of just shooting a line of projectiles, they come out in a spread of 3 shots. I actually find this to be less beneficial as a whole and makes you get unnecessarily close to consistently deal the normal DPS of a regular plain Peashooter. The 3-way EX is alright and can be good if you're close, but the Peashooter EX deals more consistent damage than the 3-way EX. I really don't see any advantage that you get from using Ms. Chalice's 3-way without a risk of getting hit more often, so I'm going to put this in the B tier. Ms. Chalice's mini-bombs are also significantly different from the normal mini-bombs. It's like a spammier version of the mini-bombs. It's still meant for dealing bursts of damage at the sacrifice of range, but it deals actually more DPS than the normal mini-bombs, is easier to maneuver with, and thus is safer to use. The EX is also just the Peashooter EX, but goes downwards at an angle, which can be beneficial and cause you to hit more times for some of the plain bosses. Although you do need to get close of course to use this, you already have to get close to use this weapon, and it makes up for the mini-bombs perks I already mentioned, and allows you to deal even more burst damage with this weapon. I would honestly say this is S tier, since it's basically a better version of the mini-bombs, and the normal mini-bombs are an A tier already. Ms. Chalice's super is just a normal super, but way less maneuverable and slow, but does more damage. You can make up for this by just getting in close to what you want to super before activating it, which you honestly should already be doing with the normal super as well. So I think throwing this in A tier with the normal super is fine. Now, with all the plain weapons and supers done, let's rank the actual supers as well. Super 1, Energy Beam, is basically the bread and butter super of Cuphead, being super easy to use and deals 87 damage. Pretty good super and works as a sort of baseline for other supers, but honestly most of the time I prefer spamming EX shots and getting that value, especially for some of the bosses. Even with that, I would say A tier makes sense. Super 2, Invincibility, is a super I've been off and on about when it comes to how much I like it. It honestly feels like the invincibility doesn't last long enough considering you need 5 cards for it, and I could use Super 1 to deal massive damage and make invincibility not needed. I would say B tier is the most fitting. Super 3, Giant Ghost, is a very hit or miss super, literally. It deals a massive 147.9 damage if you hit every time, but I honestly believe this is to make up for how hard this super is to use and capitalize on. It moves based on the direction you're looking, but a lot of the time that means you can't aim at the boss correctly and hit any of your shots, and you basically have to use weapon lock and stand still in order to actually control the ghost. It's a very weird super to use, and honestly you'd probably deal more damage consistently with your energy beam than with Giant Ghost. I'm honestly going to put this in C tier because it's not easy or fun to use, and I'd rather just use energy beam or spam EX shots than use Giant Ghost. Super 1, Spiral Pillar, is basically just energy beam but vertical. It also does more damage at 107.5, but it's slightly harder to use since you either need to hug the boss in order to hit the beam, or use it on a boss fight or phase where they're above you. The slightly more damage does make up a bit for that, so I'm gonna put it in A tier since it's basically just energy beam, and energy beam could suffer the same problem with its horizontal attack against certain bosses instead. And another super is in my opinion better than this one anyways. Super 2, Shield Pal, is pretty decent overall for getting S ranks as Ms. Chalice, but that's pretty much it. Both her other supers are just better and she already has 4 HP as is, so if you really need more HP, just use Heart Ring instead of Ms. Chalice. Feels just a bit unnecessary and is overshadowed by her 2 other supers. I would say C tier makes sense because of this. Super 3, Ghostly Barrage, is a very fun super to use because it feels like no matter what time you use it, you're always using it effectively. The super covers the whole screen, and its damage varies apparently on the size of the ghost, varying from 1.5 to 3.5 per ghost. So the absolute bottom line of damage you can deal, which is very unlikely to achieve obviously, is 50 damage and a max of 126 damage. This super can deal massive damage and also gives you a free parry at the end, which can help you with heart ring value or your super meter. I honestly think this is worth an S tier because it deals great damage on average, is extremely easy and cool to use. Now there is one more technical weapon, Whetstone. I'm gonna make this fast, D tier. You're not gonna use this unless you're doing a challenge or you're trolling, that's it. It can also help you maneuver away from enemies, but no. Well, those are all weapons ranked in Cuphead. I really can't think of any weapon that isn't placed correctly, so please leave your comments down below if you agree with me and if you disagree. If you could please like, subscribe, and share as well, since these videos take a lot of time and effort to make, especially for a college student. Well, with that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.